Hello and welcome to the show, The Awakening, here on WGSN-DB, the Going Bold and Going Solo networks. This episode of the Awakening podcast may contain frank discussions on sensitive topics, including abuse and sex trafficking. Content may not be suitable for young children and could be triggering for some listeners. We cover explicit details and provide comprehensive understanding of these important issues. The information and opinions expressed in this show are the personal views of the individual speaking based on their own experiences. They are not intended to diagnose or provide professional advice or recommendations. Listener discretion is advised. If you or somebody you know is experiencing abuse, please seek help. My guest today is Maria Natapov. Maria is a co-parenting and step-parenting expert, vice chair of the Sparrow Collective, and trusted advisor to divorce professionals, financial advisors, and parenting coaches. Maria herself is a child of divorce, a domestic abuse survivor, and now step-parent turned adoptive mom. Maria knows firsthand the pain of family conflict and the power of building a family with intention, clarity, and love. Through all of Maria's trainings, she has a diverse toolbox and can help parents and step-parents move from chaos to harmony. So thank you for joining me here, Maria.
Thank you for having me, Tina. I really appreciate the space to talk about all of these really important topics that rarely, I think, see the light of day because I think a lot of times we're just not comfortable delving into all of the messy. And I think it's really important.
It is important. And I think, we kind of talked about this before we came on the show today, that your experiences and the experiences that you help others go through are just like you said, they're not talked about. And being able to have a space where we can open up and share the details or share exactly what people experience, I think is so important, because so often we just say, oh, abuse, and just kind of box it up in one box and set it on the shelf. So I appreciate you having the courage to talk about your experiences and what you're even currently dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
So one of the things that, I think I shared some of the questions with you. And so we'll just kind of open up with, what is your experience in dealing with abuse?
Yeah, my personal, I'm guessing you're talking about like.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so it's interesting. I think it's really a variety of factors, and it was fascinating for me too through decades of being in this work, and I mean personally doing my own work, the inner work, right? And connecting all the dots to actually only within the last couple of years fully distinguishing what that picture looked like. Because I think a lot of times it can be easy to overlook how we arrive where we arrive. So, for example, for me, some of the contributing factors are cultural. I am originally from Moscow, Russia. And it was a communist country at the time we came here when I was a child. And so for me, my experience was when I left the house, I was in America. And when I came home, I was in Russia, because that was the mindset, right? That was the culture of the family. And that was the lens through which my family and my parents and my grandparents, primarily my mom at that time, and my grandparents, my maternal grandparents who raised me, were speaking to me, imparting values, et cetera. That was the expectation. That was the rule book. So I think as I've distinguished that, oppression, for example, is a big piece of it in general, and it's kind of a running theme. And so the oppression, I think, started initially in our country. And even though it was at that time distinguished because there's a lot of propaganda, so people knew, but they were in fear of speaking out because there's a lot of retaliation and all kinds of really terrible things that would happen if they did. So it was sort of a quiet knowing. And then I think it infiltrates, right? So at first, it's the voice that lives outside, and then it becomes the voice that lives inside our head. And I think that's kind of a key phenomenon. So I think it was true with some of the cultural views in my former country, at least how I was raised at that time, was kids are seen and not heard. Put your head down, obey. You are a child and elders know best. And for me, I was like a child of a child. I didn't have any siblings and my mom didn't have any siblings. So I think that intensity coming, of course, from a loving place, but to impart wisdom, to ensure safety, right? There's a lot of like fixer survivalist mentality. I think that was a lot for me, and I definitely absorbed a lot of that. And then it set me up to be in that emotionally unhealthy relationship because I was sort of groomed for it and I had no idea. And again, none of this was done maliciously to me. It just was a reality. And I think the more that we can distinguish these layers, the better equipped we are for that awareness, and more importantly, for the potential for intervention and where we can empower ourselves, our children, et cetera, and kind of eliminate, I suppose, some of those dynamics of wanting to hand off our power. That was very much what I was inflicted with, was I was used to handing over my power, or I was used to having to, prove myself and my worth and earn my seat at the table constantly. So that was the cycle in which I was stuck. And it took a lot for me to understand that and recognize that. I didn't do it alone. I did it with the help of then therapist. My ex had substance abuse issues, and I found him a day partial program. And it was upon the exit of that that I had to undergo an exit interview with the program because they wanted to ensure that they had a safe environment free from enablement. And I had no idea that we were enmeshed and codependent, and I was enabling him. And yeah, and so that was the social worker, I believe, or counselor at that facility. We ended up having to have multiple sessions for her to help me see and understand what that dynamic looked like, how I was being kind of coerced and controlled, and how I was, though, contributing by handing over my power. And it took a lot to understand that and recognize it. I felt completely shocked and blindsided by it. And then to actually start building a way forward and no longer tolerating that. Um, yeah, it took a lot. And as far as healing from that, and again, I feel like both of those things, like my childhood experiences, as well as that dynamic of that relationship, were sort of commingled, like the trauma from it, the whole dynamic of how it impacted me and my thinking and my way of being, I think was just totally blurred as far as which contributed what piece. And so it took about 10 years. So that relationship lasted for 16 years all told. And it took about 10 years for me to fully see that for what it was. Because another thing that started to happen is my now husband, whenever he would speak negatively about my former partner, I would jump to his defense. And in like this very emotionally charged way. And I didn't even understand exactly why, but it was, in many ways, I think I was also sort of like a nurturing caregiver to him. So like the roles we played for each other were a mess. We were kind of everything for each other. And and it was really, really hard for me because I kept wanting to jump to excusing his behavior, right? Like I'm reading beneath the external behavior. I don't even realize how I'm justifying and how I'm perpetuating the cycle. And I think that's probably a common experience for many, I would venture to guess, who are experiencing that. And it's very easy to lose your voice, to start to question your reality, to start to blame yourself. I know I was blamed. Everything was my fault. And at one point I started to wake up, but it took a long time for me to finally get to that level. And I started to feel like I was getting ill. Like, thank God I've never had cancer, but I had started to get this pit in my stomach that felt really toxic. Like I just had this strong sense something really terrible was going to happen if I didn't do something different. Like my body was telling me it will no longer tolerate this. And that was my wake up call. Um, and
Mhm.
it's sad that it had to come to that, but that's realistically what it was to get me to pay attention. And
Yes. So something, excuse me, something I want to hit on is the fact that you come from another country, specifically Russia, right?
Yes.
So one of the things that so many, especially young Americans, they don't realize just how much that yeah, that Russia has. And so I'm having a little bit of a problem with my internet on this side. So when you're talking, I might go dark just briefly. But
Okay.
anyways, most young Americans don't think about that. Other countries, and what I call it is old world training, old world viewpoints. And Russia has that. Even the older American people have that type of stuff. And so we see a lot of that happening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's what I,
So, and then the other thing that,
sorry. No, I was just going to say it's what I call, survivalist, right? The survivalist instincts. Like we had to survive. So we know to do certain things from that place because we need to continue and we need to ensure our offspring continues. Right. So, and it's like at that time, we didn't have the information or skills or knowledge or, whatever access that we do now. And that was what there was to do. And it's been passed down. Right. And so we become so entrenched in that, I think.
and yes, I think the entrench, and one of the other things that you mentioned is that you would often defend your ex-husband. And I think yes, that comes from some of that training, but it also comes from a level of fear and lack of knowing, so like we haven't connected the dots to the abuse yet. And I'm sure that you knew there was some form of it, but years after all of this, there's more dots and more dots that get connected.
Yeah.
And that's the way it has been with me. I didn't see the abuse. I mean, for 15 years, I didn't see it after I left there. So it took forever for me to connect those dots.
Yeah. I think for me, a big part as to why I would get so triggered and jump to defending is I felt like it was my identity was so wrapped up in him and that relationship. Because it was during my most formative years. I was a particularly young 15-year-old when we met. Um, Mentally and emotionally, I may have been 11, maybe 12, maybe even younger. And then we were together until I was 31. So it was such a huge component to my identity. We did everything together, and he was really in my head, if you will. Like the enmeshment was really, really strong. And he was the only kind of constant. I definitely was isolated from many other relationships. So I think that was another piece of it that felt so personal, right? Like there was a part where if he was being insulted, I was being insulted, or like my life or whatever it was, like it was a black mark on my, I don't know, achievements, accomplishments, who I've been being, and there's just so much meaning wrapped up in it for me. Yeah.
And and I get that. And in formative years, I think that's super important. So how old was he when you met?
He was 17, so he was like a year and a half older than me. We met in high school and we were together into early 30s.
Yeah, and I was the same with my husband. I was a little bit older, but I was married before or right at 19 and then had my first child when I was 20. And so all of that time frame is when we're still growing up.
Yeah, exactly. We're not fully formed. And again, like I said, my identity hadn't even really gotten a chance, I think, to start to develop or get watered. Like if we think of it, the cycle of a plant, like I think I was maybe barely a sprout when we met. It had not started to take shape or take root at all yet because I had a very isolated, being immigrants. My mom was working. She was studying medicine to become a doctor here in the States, like she was in Russia, because that was the only work that would afford her to take care of four people on on one salary. So she was gone before I would wake up and came home after I went to bed. So I didn't see her for all of those years. And my grandparents raised me, and they were terrified because they didn't know the rules of the land. We lived in a very, very, very safe town, but they had no clue. And they treated it like it was a war zone. So they were like, we're gonna occupy you with academics and piano so you stay put and you're busy and we can keep a watchful eye on you. And I understand the love and care as to why they made that choice. But for me, I think, again, I didn't get to learn how to engage and interact with people. The social emotional skills were completely lacking for me. So I think I definitely could have benefited from a more diverse for more diverse opportunities to engage with peers and maybe do some skill building of like teamwork in a sport or something along those lines. But, it was what it was. So I think that's another piece in my personal experience that contributed to me being like very, very new and, um, yeah, naive, I guess, coming into this situation.
And so something that I was raised on a farm, and I assume that you went through some of this stuff too, where the young girls were raised to marry a man that would take care of them. Okay, in your mom's case, she was taking care of four of you, but were you raised to think that that's what you needed to do?
It's interesting. My grandmother, all of the women in my family are really independent. My grandmother held a really respectable career in Russia. So did my mom. But yeah, that is an interesting perspective. I think there was definitely an element of that. I think I'm really fortunate because I was surrounded by such strong women that I never felt that, but there were, I think, more concerns from my family about me like leaving the home and even just going outside in general alone in the world or to do something. They wanted to shelter me and protect me. And I think that would have been different if I was a boy. I think there would have been a lot less of that because there would be this sense of a boy can take care of himself, whereas a girl is more vulnerable or not as skilled or not as capable of protecting herself. So I think from an academic and career point, no. But in general, navigating the world, yes, there was some of that for sure.
Yes. So, and then, so you get married to this now abusive husband. So, can you talk about some of that so people can understand what was going on in your home?
Yeah, a lot of it was, of course, not what I knew at the time, kind of like you. It's what I learned after the fact. And actually, there was a lot of for example, of course, I remember more examples when I was older because some of the stuff when I was younger, it was just stretches of time are lost for me. Um, I don't know if it's like blackout or disassociation or what you'd call it. I don't know if those memories are there. And if somebody were to remind me of a little seed of, hey, do you remember XYZ experience? If that would jog my memory. But what I do remember, for example, when I was working in my early 20s after graduating college, um, I remember he would pick fights with me. I was the only one who was working. He wasn't working. I was paying for everything. And because he had an injury that he was nursing. And um, I remember he would just pick a fight with me for no reason. I get home at around 5:30. I lived really close. We lived very close to my work at the time. And he would pick a fight and it would go on all night. It would go until 3 in the morning, but sometimes till 6 in the morning, where I had nothing to do but like shower, change, and just go to work again. And it was awful. And I didn't know, what these words like word salad or, confusion or jumping tracks, right? Like where it just looks like a ball of yarn and it's like purposely confused. So as soon as you think you're following the thread and you're like, no, I'm like staying on point, I'm staying on target, I'm staying in the conversation, I'm trying to address it. And as soon as it feels like we're making some appreciable headway towards some sort of an understanding or resolution or something that makes sense, it's jumped to a different track, right? And I'm like, wait, what happened? Where am I? Right? Like almost like I was transported into a different, like, I don't know, reality was what my experience was. But of course, I couldn't name it distinctly in the moment. It's only what made sense after the fact. And he would say things like, I'd be like, "Oh, it's time to eat. I'm really hungry. It's been a long day." And he would say, "Oh, you're thinking about food at a time like this," or if I had to say I had to go to the bathroom, same thing. Like, "Oh, so this doesn't matter to you?" And I was shamed and guilted, and then he would escalate, and it was the kind of thing where, I had to pick and choose my battles, right? Because it's like how much I need to sustain my energy and how much of this am I willing to engage with because I know like the toll that it's going to take, right? Like I know the cost. So I'm having to strategically plan like what do I have the capacity for right now? Um, I remember this one time a fight got out of hand. He stomped on my foot and I had no idea. I would just have these random pains and I was like, "Oh wow, I must have, I don't know, pulled something or whatever." Just it didn't occur to me because it would come and go intermittently. Years later, the pain was so bad and I was working for a catering company supplementally, and this was actually still while I was in school in college. And I went to see a podiatrist who took an x-ray and she said, "So your bone has been completely shattered and essentially your your body, because our bodies want to heal itself, it formed a sac around these shards of bone. And what you're feeling is that some of these broken bone pieces are still jabbing you, and that's why your pain is so unbearable. So then I need to have surgery to remove that." And yeah, it's just like it's strange to say some of this out loud because I still feel though like my situation, I know there's a spectrum to these behaviors. So I'm not at all suggesting just because I can relate to others who are in a similar dynamic that I know what it's like to be them or that all of these dynamics are created equal or similar. I do think though that thankfully through my work, I've been able to distinguish some common themes. And again, what I'm really grateful for, I just want to ensure that this doesn't get lost, is that you can come back to yourself and you can build the skills that you've never built, whether because they weren't available to you, whether because you didn't know, whether because your caregivers didn't know, and maybe they've lived through some cycles of abuse or trauma of their own, right? And they can only give you what they had to give, and they can't offer you what they don't have access to themselves. But I think that's a really important piece to recognize is that the past doesn't have to impact and determine and drive our future and even our present. Thankfully, there are
And
skills and tools we can learn.
And there's some of your stuff that is parallel to mine. And I think this is something that even those who are being abused right now, they're there in that and not really sure that it's abuse, just like you didn't realize that the foot pain was because he was stomping and breaking your foot. I was a stay-at-home mom for a period of time, and just like you, he would come home instead of, me coming home, and he would start a fight for absolutely no reason. The last one, where my leg just got dislocated, I was folding clothes and he came up and I knew he was drinking. And I looked down and saw my keys in my purse. As soon as he got through the door and went through the other doorway, I grabbed my keys and ran. Nothing was really said except for just a few, because I can't remember. We go through so many of these fights and we have no recollection of that. So I remember running out to get in my van to go, and he jumps in the way, bends the door. This is the last one. This time I was going to defend myself. So I broke his nose to get him out of the way, but I had already had to put my vehicle in park, so he tossed me across the yard. These are kinds of things that, I mean, this fight I knew was abuse. Now, the broken hand and separated ribs and all the bruises on my arms and
Yeah.
and ribs were, I never saw those as abuse.
No,
Never.
no. And I don't know what it was like for you. I feel like my ex and I were closely-ish matched, like physically, physiologically. So when we would get into physical, well, early on, he would also like punch me in the head. So there was that. And to your point though, I knew it was wrong, but I also didn't know that was abuse. And I felt like I deserved it.
Yep.
I was very young. I was very kind of sheltered and spoiled. It was all the terrible combinations of things one would not want to be. But I was, whatever. It was what I was where I was. But yeah, at the time, I remember thinking I deserved it. And you know what's interesting? I remember thinking, like, why did I stay? And I stayed because in my culture, they rip people down to motivate them to be better. So kids, like, it's all the comparison. It's the quintessential caricature of like a tiger mom mentality, right? Like super strict, ridiculous expectations, and like, no, you have to get these grades, you have to perform at this level, and nothing else is acceptable. And that's what it was. Now, for my family, I know they wanted to motivate me to live a better life, to make sure that I could hold my own and be successful. Right. So again, they weren't doing this out of, they didn't know how they were impacting me. But what that created in me was this severe need and desperation for affirmation and love and a cheerleader. And I have to say, my ex was those things for me. It felt unconditional. He was a huge cheerleader. He did push me. I'm also really grateful that he showed me a way. Like in my culture, I couldn't think of or see a way out of the system, right? Like I was like, I'm going to have a career. I'm not meant to be a leader. I'm not meant for more. I'm meant to be in the background, but I can be really great as a support person, and I'm detail oriented and I have XYZ skills to bring to the table. He really challenged that perception. He really, I think, blasted through the glass ceiling for me and dragged me kicking and screaming along for the ride. So I'm grateful for that. So this isn't to say that, there weren't some positive things. Now, I don't know that they were intentionally positive, but it was what I needed at the time. And I had to recognize, that's the reason I came along for that ride. That's the reason I stayed on that roller coaster, is because for me, at least I was getting what felt like love and support and a cheerleader, even though it wasn't ideal, but it was better than what I was getting from my family, and that filled a void. It filled a need. And that need seemed to trump all others until it didn't any longer, because I think then I was able to, first of all, I was older, but I think I started to see. So again, in my situation, and I recognize I'm very fortunate because unfortunately, I hear a lot of women who are stay-at-home moms and they're sort of, their hands are tied. I was the breadwinner. So I was getting out there interacting with other people. And I noticed none of them treat me this way. They respect me, they appreciate me, they look at me as an equal, they look at me as very capable. And I think that started to awaken within me like, oh, maybe I don't need to work so hard to earn my place, and it started to awaken this um, self-reliance perhaps and appreciation for what I brought to the table. So it started to infiltrate my way of thinking about myself. And I think that was the catalyst and the start. That and also the desire of I want this pit in my stomach to go away. This is not sustainable any longer. I started to really awaken because the toxicity and the moments of fighting started to significantly outweigh the good times. And so it just wasn't sustaining me anymore. And the good times weren't so great. They had like this dark cloud over them. And so I think it was all of those factors that started to contribute to that. What's interesting that I want to point out, so when we broke up, I had no language for talking about it. So I ended up, because I was like, how to describe this to friends and family? Because again, I was isolated. Nobody knew what was going on. And I was like, anything that I can think of to say, I just feel so foolish and stupid. Like, why did I stay? And so as I started to open my mouth, I'm like, all I can say is it was a mutual breakup. So that's what I said. And then years later, I met this woman through networking when I started on my entrepreneur journey. And she started to say, because she was in therapy with her husband, and she started to say what she was learning about some of these cycles that the therapist was pointing out. And the thing she was describing, it's like I felt seen for the first time. It's like, oh my God, okay, so I didn't imagine this. This is real. This really exists. These dynamics really exist. This behavior has a name and it has identifiable traits. And suddenly I was like, I felt for the first time ever, I felt like I had language to talk about it. And I felt like I had somebody who understood. Because before that, I had no way of talking about what that experience was like. All I could say is it was mutual because it was like, I sound crazy. Like nobody kept me there with a gun to my head. And it was not yes, it was a power dynamic, but it was not one where I felt completely powerless. So it's like, why am I putting up with it? Why am I staying? And then I felt like I didn't have an answer for that. And I felt so ashamed and foolish, just so completely foolish that I couldn't bring myself to talk about it with people. And now, of course, it's a very different story, but now I have the understanding that I didn't have back then.
Yeah, and one of the key things, and I want our viewers, especially those of you who might be in an abusive situation, you're trying to figure this out and connect some dots, is that this is one of the things that almost every single one of my clients go through is that shame, that self-blaming, and why did I put up with this for so long? I have a girlfriend whose husband died and he was extremely abusive with her. And she goes, why did I put up with this for so long? Why did I take him through his deathbed? And why? Why? And this is a normal part of this form of abuse. And
Yes.
so I want to ask another question, and then I know that you help stepmoms, and I know that you've gone through some stuff with your stepchild, and so being able to communicate about that kind of stuff, I think is super important. So if you can just kind of touch base on that a little.
Yeah. Right now. Yeah. So I
Yes.
came into my stepmom experience. When I met my husband, my now husband, shortly after I officially broke up with my former husband. Um, I try to convince him, like, I am not the right role model. You have a daughter and you need a much more suitable, reliable caregiver individual in her life. And he wouldn't listen. And his reasoning was because I had caregiving experiences that I had experienced as a child that didn't work for me, because I was very clear on what did not work for me, that I was better set up to be a parent figure than I was giving myself credit for. And reluctantly, when I really sat with that, I thought that made a lot of sense. So our test was, and this was like a make or break. So when we knew we were really serious, I was going to meet her, and depending on how that meeting went, we were either going to continue or not. And we met, and it went extremely well. So I became a stepmom, and 5 years into that journey, she revealed she was being abused by her biological mom and stepdad. And it was horrible abuse. It was awful, awful emotional abuse, like just berated and ostracized and just horrible. And then it was physically, she was being beaten. And there was sexual grooming that, thank God, did not escalate to something even more severe, but it seemed like it kept escalating. So that seemed like that was around the corner. And and it was awful. And thank God she fairly quickly revealed these details. It was multiple conversations, of course. We moved quickly. My husband um, he went to file a motion and get started on the custody trial, et cetera. And she moved in with us full time. So I found myself in the situation of being a stepmom, not being mom, holding space for mom who wasn't physically there, and yet being like an overnight mother figure role person. And for those, I don't know how many people are intimately familiar with significant trauma, but usually there's what's called a honeymoon period. So essentially, once the horribleness of the environment and situation stops, it feels like a honeymoon because it feels like a temporary vacation. And it's like the person is still bracing themselves. They can't fully relax. They're enjoying that experience, but they can't fully relax because they're thinking it's temporary and they're going to go back. And once the central nervous system and body recognizes that it's over, that's when usually, pardon my language, am I allowed to swear?
Yes, ma'am.
That's when the shit hits the fan and they start to actually process the nightmare that they've lived through. And that was very much my kiddo's experience. Within 6 to 8 months, she was she had a horrible raging disordered eating situation that just like came out of nowhere with a vengeance. She had complex PTSD. She had awful anxiety and regular panic attacks, like horrendous panic attacks. She was catastrophizing leaving, catastrophizing going to school. She had major separation anxiety from myself and my husband. She all the things, awful depression, suicidality, all of it. And she started therapy, and then about 8 months in, they discussed having some family therapy with mom. They did that sparingly because that was about all she could tolerate. And unfortunately, it didn't go well. And so my kiddo chose to have no contact. And and then 2 years later, or 2 years ago, excuse me, that was 7 years ago. 2 years ago, just before her 18th birthday, she wanted to meet with mom and asked her to relinquish parental rights and wanted me to adopt her, which I have. Um, so yeah, so we've really gone through the whole all of it in the entirety of our experience. She's still very much on her journey. She's now 20, and because she's had various therapeutic interventions, it seems like it's starting to take root, but it was really hard. She also has ADHD, so that's another piece that is kind of more complicated. Also, it's very difficult often for therapists to distinguish what belongs or was caused by the ADHD and what was caused by the trauma. They're very like intermingled. So that was a whole big thing too, is to distinguish what is what. And so yeah, she's very much on her healing journey. So, and you know, you would think because I was a child of a contentious divorce, and because I also later in my teens and early 20s had step parents, that I would know what not to do. But in fact, I didn't, right? Because I think it's so easy to underestimate how much the way we were raised and the dynamics that played out in our early childhood just rear their head and become second nature to us. Like there are times I would hear myself and I was like, wow, why am I doing this right now? Why do I sound like this? Where's all this intensity coming from? You know, and again, intentions were always in the right place, but to a child, she doesn't hear my intentions, especially as she's recovering from trauma from being yelled at and berated. So my way of, again, like I was yelled at and berated, that was, but from a loving place, but like it all just sounds like the same kind of horrible noise, right? So naturally, she wasn't taking kindly to it, but I had no way to understand that back then. So I think it's just, yeah,
Yeah.
just these cycles are so ingrained.
And I think I want everybody, I want the viewers to understand that this is the point that you need help. You need to seek help, and seeking either a divorce specialist, somebody like myself that's trained in the abuse stuff. They're helpful, but also therapists that work that help with abuse, not just a regular therapist, because the therapist really has to understand abuse. And in the case with Maria, being able to seek out somebody that can help you be a step parent,
Yep.
especially, it doesn't really have to even be in the case with abuse, but that can help you with the step parenting aspect. Asking for help is huge. So, Maria, what do you think the biggest misconception of this type of abuse is?
You know, I want to speak to a couple of other points, Tina, that I think are really important that I had no idea, and it took me a long time to recognize. So, first of all, I really scoured because I was working in healthcare at the time. I really utilized all of my resources and connections. And again, my mom's a doctor. Um, to try to find the absolute best, most qualified supports for my stepdaughter. And we were very fortunate to have some incredible, incredible clinicians. And my stepdaughter is very clever, and she's been through abuse, which very commonly for children, that results in masking behavior, which basically means like hiding it, and sometimes triangulation, which means, oh, it's not my fault, it's this person's fault, right? Like deflecting, like I don't hold accountability, and all kinds of things like that that are very, very difficult to identify, difficult to pinpoint, feel impossible to actually navigate. And what I want to say about that, and the reason I'm bringing it up, is my stepdaughter would go to sessions with these incredible clinicians and she would run circles around them, telling them the story that she wanted them to hear. And despite their incredible training, it wasn't always effective to get her out of that loop, and people get out of therapy what they really want to put into therapy. So I just want to say that with a caveat and with caution, no clinician or professional is going to be a substitute parent. You know your child best. You're the one who's with them 24/7. These professionals don't see them like that. They see them for a short amount of time and they don't really know who they are. And yes, they bring a certain skill set, but you need to be involved. You need to advocate and you need to have a direct line to these professionals. And secondly, therapy can be valuable, but it's not forward focused and it's not necessarily solution oriented. So you might need some other skills, and some other team members to help you actually find a way to move forward. For example, primarily what I actually support families with is creating an operating system for their communication to reduce conflict. Not only does that foster a safe environment, but it also fosters an effective communication exchange. And between the co-parents specifically, it creates emotionally secure spaces for their children to live and be free to love both parents, which is so critically important and often takes a huge emotional toll on them because they don't feel that they can. And, I think it's just so important to your point, Tina, that it takes a team and you need um, professionals who really understand at a deep level what these dynamics look like, how to navigate them, and don't get thrown because you need to not only really get it, but you also need to know effectively how to navigate it in a way that feels compassionate, but also that doesn't feel like we're just gonna sidestep it because I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what to do with it. So if you're getting those vibes, like the person's overwhelmed or they're anxious just with what you're sharing with them, that's a good sign they're not your person. If there's somebody who's throwing a lot of jargon at you and then doesn't feel like they really understand your situation and they can't speak to you and on your level and explain to you some of the things that are going on and some of the specific ways and how they can support you, they're likely also not your person. I think it's so important.
Yes, and 100%. That's why I said, seek the help you need, but from professionals who understand, coming from the loss of my husband. Oh, when I start talking about the loss of my husband, everybody kind of like, ooh, they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to go there. In America, we don't very much, we don't ask questions about that. We kind of glaze over that and walk away. So it's the same thing with abuse. When people don't understand, you need to seek something else. Now we're getting close to the end today, Maria. So one of my like the question I think that's probably most important is what do you want somebody who might be in an abusive situation to get from this conversation?
Yeah, I think again, I think I mentioned it briefly, but you can empower yourself. You can create a system where you stop abandoning yourself and you support yourself and you meet your own needs while also still, if you want to maintain a relationship, maybe one you have to maintain, maybe you have kids together and you have no choice but to still co-parent together. But there's a way to make that doable in a way that still supports your peace. So if the cost of conflict, for example, is too much for you to ever have a face-to-face interaction or even a phone conversation, then that's not the system we're going to create together. But I want you to know there's skills you can learn and there's a way that you can build your communication exchange that does offer you the opportunity to exchange important information about your kids and make shared decisions together, for example, or just simply empowers you to have your voice and to no longer kowtow with conflict or sidestep conflict or just simply appease it all the time. That is not the way, right? That's kind of like negotiating with a terrorist. Nothing good is going to come of that. No, you have to stand in your own power. You have to learn what it looks like to step into leadership, connect with your voice, connect with your values, and no longer, keep yourself in the same trap. Like oftentimes I think for victims, they don't realize they're in that trap. But there's a way that you can free yourself and free your heart. Because when you free your heart, when you gain that clarity, you give yourself the gift of being able to actually genuinely connect with those who are worthy of that connection, who will nurture you and nourish you. You can create safe, healthy environments and relationships. You no longer need to survive off of the crumbs that you have been surviving off of. And finally, another way that I work with clients is I'm a facilitator of this really remarkable modality called rapid resolution therapy. And essentially, when we've been in this kind of a situation or this environment for a long time, our central nervous system is constantly in fight or flight mode, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And when we can create the connection between what we consciously know to be true, which is maybe something along the lines of, I'm done living in this way. It's not sustainable for me. I have no more energy left to give to this. I need something to shift. And when you are ready for more ease and calm in your body, we create a connection between your subconscious mind, which is what's responsible for physiologically how you feel, your emotions, sensations, intrusive thoughts, etc., as well as what you consciously are desiring. And when you do that, you just shift through. It's like all of that pain, all of that suffering just disappears. It just melts away. It just shifts. And you get to be free. And you get to now put all of that energy rather than into fear of how do I appease this terrible situation or avoid it into what you're actually desiring to create for yourself, which is a much brighter future that you deserve.
So very good information. And so I know all your contact information is going to be below the show in the show notes, but how can people get a hold of you, Maria?
Yeah, I think the best way is shoot me an email. It's at Maria at synergistic stepparenting2ps.com. Also, you're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's at Maria Natapov or on Facebook, also at Maria Natapov. I love to talk to people one-on-one if I can be a support in any way, or help you explore what is your next best step. It would be my pleasure to do so.
So awesome information. Thank you. And so for those of you who don't know, I'm a certified high conflict divorce coach. I specialize in helping men and women go through the process. Not only am I trained, but I've also, as you've heard today, I've experienced my own. I've also, the reason why I say I work with men, my father has experienced abuse to the point that I've ended up pulling him out of the hospital from his abusive ex-wife. And my late husband experienced what he would classify as torture in his marriage. And I got to witness some of that. So I've seen that. I've learned that. That's where I come in as your divorce coach. And so you can reach me at CoachTinaLynn@gmail.com. That's CoachTinalynn @gmail. My website is divorcecoachspecialist.com. And on social media, on Facebook, I'm Tina Lynn Huggins. That's Huggins. On LinkedIn under Tina Huggins. On Instagram under Divorce Coach Tina Lynn. And on TikTok under Divorce Tina. So Maria, can you give a last little bit of advice for our viewers?
Yeah, when I was in the depths of despair and like sobbing on my bathroom mat in the bathroom, locked up, like I have no idea how to move forward, but I know I can't bear this anymore. Just listen inside. You have all the answers, you have all the wisdom, but sometimes through these experiences, we lose sight and we lose that connection, we lose the path to ourselves. So just have the courage and trust that you asking and interacting with that question is enough. Keep asking it. Eventually, you'll start to hear whispers of something that will become louder. And magically, once you start to open yourself up to wanting to hear, you will get resources and everything that you need will come to you. It will just appear suddenly. It's like you can see with new eyes. And so never disregard. It's never too late. And there is a brighter future ahead for you if you want it. And you can access it and you can start now, no matter where you're finding yourself. And of course, Tina and I are here as well if you need to talk this through with somebody.
Yes. And especially in dealing with step parenting stuff, I can definitely tell you that Maria is the person to go to. So if you're here, seeking that kind of help, reach out to a professional. Don't just reach out to a lay person. Reach
Yes.
out to somebody who understands it and gets it, just like Maria does, and just like I do. Okay, so it's super important that if you are dealing with abuse right now, that you get the police officers there. If you can call 911, call them, get the police there. If you believe somebody is being abused right next to your house, call the cops, 911. Get them there. Once the cops are there, they press charges on the individual. This is your key out. This is your time to get out safely. At this point, there's going to be a protection order put in place that will keep them away from you. This is your time to create your exit from the marriage, relationship, from the house if necessary. But this is your time. Don't take the charges off. Once you do that, usually the abuse that follows after that is way worse than the abuse that came before. So if you are dealing with and need the cops there, 911, it's the same in Canada. Domestic violence hotline is also 800-799-7233. That number again is 800-799-7233. Please, please call for help. Get the help there. And if you are in a place, and Maria talked about laying on the floor, I was there 6 months after my relationship ended with my husband, where suicide was the only way out for me. If you're there, please call the suicide prevention hotline. Let somebody help walk you off that ledge. That number is 988. Again, that number is 988. I want to thank you so much for being with us here, Maria. And I would love to ask everybody to please like, comment, and share this information so it can help as many people as possible. And thanks again, Maria.
Thank you so much.